Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be moderating this session that's called More Than Just Two Wheels, How Coalition Building and E-Bike Policies Are Changing Cycling Spaces. So I want to start off by introducing our wonderful panelists here. So we have Dr. Ashley Lavelle. Let me pull up her bio one sec. All right, here we go. So Dr. Ashley Lavelle joins us from People for Bikes, and she leads the electric bicycle policy and campaign initiatives. She received her PhD in environmental sociology from Colorado State University. Prior to joining the People for Bikes team, Ash brought people together to work on social and environmental projects, including sustainability in the built environment and large landscape conservation for the National Park Service. When she's not advocating for electric bicycles, you can find Ash riding around the Front Range of Colorado on her electric cargo bike with her two little boys. So we're really excited to have her here, and she brings this national perspective as an expert. And then we have two of our very own local leaders, Vanessa Gallego and Kristen McRae. So start with Vanessa. Vanessa Gallego is a native Tucsonense and is the Chief Operating Officer for Recyco, Tucson's industry-leading scrap metal recycling center. She's an alumni of the University of Arizona. Vanessa remains involved in various community organizing efforts around sustainability and mobility advocacy, including as the chair of the Tucson Commission on Climate, Energy, and Sustainability. She is also a board member for Tucson's Bicycle Inter Community Art and Salvage and longest continuous bike run collective nonprofit in the US that promotes affordable bicycle transportation through education, access to bicycle salvage, and bike art. Vanessa is the founding member and ride leader of FUGA, Familias Unidas Ganando Accesibilidad, Families United Gaining Accessibility. FUGA is an organization on the south side of Tucson made up of stakeholders and residents, highlighting mobility through bicycle riding on the streets and advocacy. And last but not least, Kristen McRae is an educator, bike mechanic, and community advocate in Tucson, Arizona. As the education coordinator at BICUS, Bicycle Inter Community Art and Salvage, her work has focused on access to safe, reliable transportation with the bicycle as a means of independence, empowerment, and creative expression. In 2018, Kristen was named Advocate of the Year by the Tucson-Pima County Bicycle Advisory Committee for her work with youth ride clubs in South Tucson. She is also a volunteer ride leader with FUGA, leading community rides on the south and west sides of Tucson. In her spare time, Kristen studies medical plants of the Sonoran Desert and is an artistic welder, making sculptures from salvaged metal and recycled bicycle parts. We have a very talented panel here, and I'm so privileged to hold this space. So we'll start off with Ash giving her perspective on this panel, and we'll be followed by Kristen and Vanessa, and then we'll get into a moderated discussion with leaving the last few minutes of the panel with some time for Q&A from the audience. So Dr. Ash Lavelle.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you so much for having me here. I am so excited to be talking to everyone. I wish I was in person with you. If you can't tell, your environment is one of my more favorite places to be. So I'm Ash Lavelle. I'm the Electric Bicycle Policy and Campaign Director for People for Bikes. People for Bikes is a national cycling advocacy organization, and we are also the trade association for the bicycle industry. So we get to represent all of those brands that you know and love to ride. And I get to work with those industry members every day to kind of help forward bicycling in the US. Our goal at People for Bikes is to get more people riding bicycles more often. So I have an awesome job. I mean, I get to do all things electric bicycle. I'm a registered lobbyist in multiple different states, advocating for bicycle access and categorizing what an electric bicycle is. I took this job a little bit less than a year ago, and I had no idea what I was getting in for. I am not from the bike industry, and I didn't know what a big deal electric bicycles are. But let me give you a little bit of context about how big of a big deal electric bicycles are. So electric bicycles are the best selling electric vehicle in the US 2 years in a row. They have outsold road bikes in the bicycle industry for the last 3 years, and they're continuing to grow. So we saw a massive increase in ridership and sales at the beginning of the pandemic. And we saw kind of 2 years of really insane bicycle kind of growth in the US. And now that we're seeing the end of the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of the traditional bicycle sales kind of flatten out a little bit, but that is not the case for electric bicycles. We still cannot keep these things on shelves. And I think it's because they are just joyful. They are so fun to ride. They lower the hills. They make riding in areas that may be a little warm sometimes, or in my context, a little chilly in Colorado, way more enjoyable. And they have the potential to really introduce a lot more people to the joys of bicycling because they lower those barriers. So big trends in electric bicycles. We're seeing a lot more companies get into this space. One of the big things that I spend a lot of time doing is defining what is an electric bicycle and what is not an electric bicycle. So People for Bikes spends a lot of time advocating for bicycles, but we don't advocate for mopeds and scooters and those types of things, because we really want to make sure that bike lanes, protected bike lanes, greenways, all of that remain accessible to bikes. And so a big part of my job is the 3-class system of electric bicycles. So talking about what makes an electric bicycle an electric bicycle. I'll give you a little overview and then I'll send some follow-up information as well. So class 1 electric bicycles go up to 20 miles an hour and they're pedal assist. So you have to be pedaling in order to get assistance from the motor. Class 2 electric bicycles are throttle assist. And so there's a throttle on the handlebar and you can again go up to 20 miles an hour. And then class 3 goes up to 28 miles an hour and is back to pedal assist. So those are usually used for kind of long distance commuting, that type of thing, usually ridden on roads. And that's the 3 kinds of bicycles. So if someone tries to sell you something that goes 40 miles an hour and calls itself an electric bicycle, that's not an e-bike. So just want to make that very clear about what we're talking about here. So I talked about our trends. E-bikes are a big deal. They're super fun to ride and they're continuing to grow in popularity. One of the things that we're seeing as an industry is that with all these e-bikes, there's a lot of lithium ion batteries that need to be recycled. And I really loved talking to Vanessa earlier about her recycling work. And it's a big deal for the industry. We actually just launched a program last November, industry-wide electric bicycle battery recycling program. So Call to Recycle is leading that program. And we've got sites across the contiguous US where people can drop off their batteries. It will fully launch to the public in the fall of this year. So don't go dropping anything off yet, but there will be a big announcement. And we're really looking forward to, being able to keep these things out of the landfills where they shouldn't be in the first place because they're hazardous materials, but also being able to reuse them and safely handle and manage these batteries as well. So that's been a big initiative for the industry around e-bikes. Another big initiative is these incentive programs. We know electric bicycles are more expensive than the traditional bicycle, and we want to make sure that they're accessible for everyone who wants one. So we have incentive programs that are happening across the country at the state and local and federal levels. We had the E-Bike Act, which was initially part of the Build Back Better Act, and we're now looking for a new vehicle for that, policy vehicle. Sorry, got wonky there for a second. But we're also seeing incredible incentive programs happening at the state level. Connecticut just passed a multi-million-dollar incentive package. California has a great one. Colorado has a big one. And hopefully we can get one here in Arizona here soon. So really working hard to make these bicycles more financially accessible. And then finally, how do we keep people on bikes? This incredible boom that we saw over the pandemic was so exciting and the industry is thrilled. But we also realize that there's barriers to riding. I mean, a big piece of that is safety, feeling safe while you're riding. Better infrastructure is the biggest way we can get people to stay on their bicycles. So protected bike lanes, safe streets, understandings of motorists about how to treat bicycles and that type of thing. That's a big thing that People for Bikes works on. And we also deeply support the work that's done at the local level to build more protected infrastructure for bicycles, both in urban and rural settings. I'd really love for electric bicycles to be the way that we can change the conversation around recreation and transportation in rural areas, as well as in urban areas. So because you can ride farther on an e-bike, maybe this is something that's more appealing to people that are not right downtown. So I don't want to burn through everybody else's time. That's my quick little overview of all things electric bicycle at the national level. Thank you again so much for giving me the time to chat today.
Wow, thanks, Ash. I learned a lot, and I'm sure folks did too. Thank you for that really great introduction and super informative. I hope that we can get more e-bikes into the hands of people and all people in this region. So now we're going to move on to Kristen. If you would like to give your perspective on this topic, that'd be wonderful.
Thanks, Gabrielle. I want to talk a little bit about BICUS and what we do in Tucson. BICUS stands for Bicycle Intercommunity Art and Salvage, and we really interact with the bike and bike riders in all the life cycles of a bike. So someone is given a bike, they're brand new to it, but they don't really know what it means to maintain it or take care of it. And they can come to BICUS and get take classes and sort of learn more about their mode of transportation. We also recycle bikes. So people that are done with a bike, ready to move on to another bike, or have found sort of discarded bicycle materials, those get donated to BICUS. They're salvaged, cleaned up, and redistributed out back into the community. And then any parts that are broken or sort of no longer able to be bike parts, we salvage as much as we can into art projects and other creative reuses for that. So we're not a traditional bike shop. We're really focused on affordable bicycle transportation and education and breaking down those barriers that people see in order to really feel comfortable and confident riding their bikes. A lot of folks that come in really come in with this sense that like, well, I want to ride my bike more, but what do I do if something goes wrong? And really wanting to know more about how to take care of bikes and how to feel confident that like, if something happens, they're going to be able to still get to where they're going. We've really seen a lot of increase in need in Tucson in the last 10 years that I've been with BICUS, where the need for affordable transportation, reliability of transportation, and the desire to sort of have that for recreation and fun, but also just to get to work and school has really grown a lot. And so we have a lot of Earn a Bike programs where people can come in and volunteer and actually learn about bike mechanics while they're earning their bike and their transportation needs. We also have in 2015, BICUS collaborated with the Living Streets Alliance and the Safe Routes to School program to help start some bike clubs in South Tucson. So we have been fortunate to have a lot of experience with those young folks, young kind of second, third, and fourth graders, really learning to ride bikes and exploring their neighborhood in the streets of South Tucson and farther south, and kind of where really connecting where they can get to and what that sort of independent mode of transportation can look like, and really learning what does riding in the streets and in the traffic look like. And in terms of sort of kind of the future of how this is changing the bike industry, I think bringing lots of different people together, giving lots of different access points, lots of different entry points into learning about bicycle transportation and creating sort of a sustainable way to continue that access is really important for sort of building the change that we want to see in our communities.
Thank you, Kristen. I love how you've expanded on this topic and shared the work that you're doing at BICUS. And it's really enlightening to hear more about like what are the needs, what are the challenges, and like how do we move closer to really making it possible for more people to get on bikes, removing those barriers. So Vanessa, let's go to you now.
Hi everyone, like Gabriela said, my name is Vanessa Gallego. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I want to say that I'm fairly new to cycling in the last 5 years. Not only was I reintroduced to a bike, but I was kind of thrown into this field. And it was easy for me to grasp how important bicycling was to our community because of all the intersects. Right now, you've heard a little bit about it. You've heard it with BICUS and how they're able to connect folks to bicycles and the education portion. So what FUGA does, Families United Gaining Accessibility, is in our name, right? We are uniting families to get that accessibility, to be able to use bikes or other modes of transportation, alternate to a vehicle, to start seeing their communities in a different way. And that's from the perspective of a bike. So we've been using the bicycle as a tool to not only engage communities that, like our Mayor Regina Romero said earlier, have been historically disenfranchised, have been left out in the planning and the transportation talks. We get them engaged with the bicycle. And that's one way to not only view their community differently, but start investing in their own way. We use the tool to have fun, to bring awareness of us on the streets, but also it's another way for us to continue communications, especially around policy. So FUGA really helps in the community kind of connect. We partner up with BICUS to be able to make sure people have that connection to bicycles, whether it's education, obtaining a bike, or maybe just fixing it. We know that these barriers are huge for these communities who have been historically left out. And really, we're just trying to get back into a playing field that we're able to, enjoy our community like other folks of other part of town are able to. And that includes access to the loop, access to areas that maybe families didn't see themselves in there. So that's what we really use the bicycle for. But we know that, it opens all these different spaces, especially when we come and talk about like climate, when we talk about heat island. And I don't want to repeat what was said earlier, but those are the things that FUGA tries to identify and work within our community. I'm super excited about this conversation about e-bikes, because that's another form. And like Ash was saying, when you're talking about communities that have heat islands, or communities like Tucson that are upwards of 100 degrees or more, getting to that place is that much more important, especially when you're 100 degree more. So that's what I do with FUGA. And like I said, I'm really happy to be here. And this conversation is super important to communities that need that empowerment. So.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I can speak as somebody who's been lucky to be on these FUGA rides and been led by these incredible women. And it's just really something, like there's nothing like it here in our region. Just that the feeling of like being in community, the space that you create, seeing those families out there. And it's the whole idea of the critical mass on these rides, taking a lane, taking up space. And like you said, these riders, these people are out on the street, and it's about making them more visible, and you do it so well, and you make it so people feel like it is a space that they're welcome to, even if they're not geared to the typical cyclist or whatnot. But I think you all bring great perspectives to this issue. We do have a comment from the audience that says, our city is starting to mandate electric vehicle charging in new housing, commercial development, as it anticipates expanding electrical vehicle purchase and operation. However, this policy is centering vehicles electric or internal combustion. Therefore, I would argue that the future is already here with e-bikes, and we should adjust policy and design around this reality. E-bikes not only outpaced trad bikes, but EVs as well. So I'm wondering if anybody has any reactions to that comment.
I love that comment. 100% agree. Yeah, I think they're here, they're the newest form of vehicle, the newest form of recreational transportation, of commuting transportation. And so everyone is still kind of trying to figure out, like, what does infrastructure even mean with electric bicycles? It's slightly different than with traditional bicycles. You need to think about charging. You need to think about really good storage, because these are basically, hopefully, car replacements. And it's different to get your e-bike stolen than it is to get your regular bike stolen, although both are tragic. But figuring out, like, what are those other pieces of making people's lives easier so that they can ride their bikes is a really important piece, in my opinion, of a city's role.
I'll chime in here. My Commission of Climate, Energy, and Sustainability very much push for EV readiness here in the city of Tucson. And I think it's like really important that our citizens be able to reach out to our representatives and, voice that this is something that's needed in our community. Because as we're trying to advance EV, even with just vehicles, we see a lot of pushback, and these are pushback from both construction, from folks that are actually making houses, or actually folks in charge implementing these changes. So one of the ways that folks can help here is definitely reaching out to your local council person, reaching out and making your voice heard that these are wanted in your community. Because if you're not at the table requesting that, you're not going to be heard.
Vanessa, I love that what you just shared, and like being at the table, and what the role, like your call to action to people that are listening and the community. That reminds me back to the opening remarks that our Mayor Romero shared. It's like, insert yourself at the table, be there, advocate, make your voice heard. And we know that hasn't always been easy in the past, but I think you are a prime example of that. You hold these very important seats on different committees and spaces, and both the advocacy role and on these city commissions, where you're able to influence this decision making and policies. So I want to bring this back to a question for all of you, and thinking about what kinds of infrastructure and policies would help cities like Tucson safely and equitably shift more people to bikes.
I can weigh in on that a little bit. I think that Tucson is not where it needs to be for traditional bikes, much less for electronic bikes or e-bikes. That we just not forget that we still have issues with connectivity. We're still reeling from the historical marginalization of our South and West sides, and our other communities of color being pushed out with the historic redlining. Like, that hasn't been adapted away from yet. So as exciting as some of these innovations are, most of the folks that we deal with at Bicus, even a new traditional bike is priced out of our, their price range, much less an e-bike or the infrastructure needed for it. Safe crossings. I've seen just really an explosion in great bike paths with the finishing of the El Paso Greenway, but I still need to bring my bike club down 10th Avenue in order to reach it, right? And that is an area where the street sweepers don't go through South Tucson, and so there's like a dangerous amount of gravel in the bike lane in that neighborhood. And so I think there are a lot of ways that we need to really draw the connections to the resources we've been investing in back into each of the neighborhoods.
I don't think I can say it any better than Kristen. I think really understanding like which neighborhoods are prioritized and which ones need to be prioritized, and how it comes. I mean, that note about gravel is huge. And I think people who don't ride don't understand how unsafe it is to have gravel in a bike lane. So I think there's also a component of getting decision makers and others on bicycles, taking them on rides and having them have those experiences of like, oh, right. Okay. So this neighborhood, this is set up, but in this neighborhood, we're, of course people aren't riding. It's not safe. It doesn't feel safe. We've found that those kind of tours are extremely helpful when talking to decision makers. Kristen, that was a great comment.
Ash, I'm going to jump in here. So Fuga has invited several folks from the city several times on rides. We're actually going to be having a city staff ride coming up soon. But with that in mind, right, that the same folks who are making policy decisions come and see those views from the bicycle point of view and be able to see the potholes, right? Be able to see the gravel in the areas that have low lighting and can be very dangerous for us. So I think that's where Fuga comes in and be able to kind of merge, that kind of conversation and be able to illustrate, right, what our streets look like, depending where you're riding, especially with areas that have been historically marginalized, like Kristen said.
This is great. Thank you for bringing light to that. It's the maintenance, right? The connections that Kristen, you're talking about, like first and last mile also. And they all come into play. It's not just like, okay, once you have the bike, now what? Like, can you get there safely? And then I'm just hearing all of you speak to the reasons why, like the barriers. Like, I think it's very important for us to ask when, like, if we hear somebody say, oh, well, people don't ride on this side of town. Why? Why do you think? And then you just keep drilling down to what are the root causes and how do we change the systems to make it more accessible. So I love the wisdom that you all bring to this. Thinking about the bicycle as a tool, that is something that you all mentioned. So why are bikes such a powerful tool to connect different cultures? Can any of you speak to that?
Oh my gosh, I am so bad at waiting. Okay, we were just staring each other down to figure out which one was going to talk first. I'll go first. Well, again, I think there is so much joy that comes with riding a bike, whether it's a traditional bike or an electric bike or anything. The ability when you're little to get on a bicycle and have that freedom of being able to rove a little bit farther from home than you can when you're walking is something that we all carry with us as we get older. And you see a city differently on a bicycle than you do in a car or when you're walking. And I think it allows you to kind of move around at a pace that allows you to see other people and experience things that you may not otherwise be experiencing. So I think it opens up perspectives through a really unique way of being on a bicycle. And I think there's a great, if one person loves a bicycle and tells another person they love a bicycle, it's a great bonding opportunity, regardless of your cultural identity or any other kind of identity. Like bikes can be unifying. I'm talking at a 30,000 foot level here. So I'm going to let the other two experts here kind of talk more on a Tucson level.
Thanks, Ash. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how like Fuga connects worldwide, right, with bicycles. We have modeled some of our rides with other organizations around the world that have rides. I mean, our last Friday of the month is modeled after the Critical Mass Ride that happens in different countries around the world to bring attention to bicycles. So that kind of just shows, right, how like bicycles not only connect, folks when we talk about transportation, but like Ash was saying, right, there's a certain joy, there's a certain feeling you get from a bicycle that not many other tools can give. So a lot of times when Fuga's trying to work with some policy or maybe some ideas, we definitely look at organizations like People for Bikes Right, People for Mobility Justice out of LA, El Paso critical mass rides that they do. We also look at countries in Central and South America who have done rides like Ciclovia, who continue to make rides that show presence of people who've been injured on bikes, or any deaths that happen. And some of those things that happen around the world don't really happen here locally in Tucson. So those impacts of being able to connect with these organizations and bring some of that to Tucson is huge. Last month we had a ride specifically just for niñas, and that was modeled after Santiago de Chile ride that they have annually to bring awareness of girls being on bikes. So I think that, the bike connects us in many ways. And the beauty of it is, right, that we can bring that home to Tucson and be able to highlight and be able to show on an international level how this is unifying.
I think the bicycle is such a community builder because it is an independent form of transportation, but it is communal at the same time, right? So really, I think what's important, what a lot of advocacy groups around the country are doing amazing work in, is creating these intentional, invitational spaces to build up our community and the culture of our community and celebrate in the streets that autonomy that we can create while creating a shared experience, right? And so I think it's really unique in that way that you can be all individually acting, but it's important to be creating these autonomous spaces and these intentional spaces and really like making sure that people are feeling invited in. This is a space that represents you, that represents us, that we're taking kind of the charge on it. And it's not just there and we expect you to go find it yourselves, that we're really going to bring it to you to celebrate this together.
Wow, Kristen, I love how you're framing this as the autonomy and like the individual's role, but how it's the key to like being in community and the community aspect to this, which is what you all do so well. So thank you for sharing that. I have a question from the audience. And the question is, some argue that e-bikes are dangerous to non-e-bike riders where they share a path. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not this is a real conflict, or are they compatible? To whoever wants to take it first.
Okay, I'll go first and then I'll hand it over because I want to hear the local perspective on this as well. This is something the industry talks about a lot. Are e-bikes, because they can go faster, are they inherently dangerous? We've done studies that show that e-bike riders ride at the same speed in congested areas as traditional cyclists. And I can send that data if that's helpful. But one big thing that I, as a recovering academic, am really interested in is better understanding the difference between perceived risk and actual risk. So People for Bikes is actually doing 2 studies right now that are user intercept studies. One's in California that has incredible amounts of e-bike ridership, and another is in New England, both on like what are the actual risks that people are experiencing in terms of user conflict versus what are their perceptions of risk associated with e-bikes. We don't have the data on that yet, but I will say that preliminary data shows that there's really just a huge disconnect between what that perception is and how much risk is actually associated with e-bike riders. Personally, I will say I have been buzzed way more times by somebody who is training for a triathlon or road racing or something like that on a traditional bike than I have been by someone on an e-bike. But that's my personal anecdote.
I don't have any local stats on this information, just again, personal experience. Oftentimes when I'm riding with someone who has an e-bike, I don't even know it because they're using they're just pedaling, or they're using a light pedal assist. And similar to Ash, when the section of the Santa Cruz where we're frequently on Fuga rides and on the west side where I live, It's more often folks who are trying to use this as their kind of personal recreation gym, maybe going a little faster than they need to through a congested area that has like felt less safe. And I think it's how personal riders are gonna approach this common space, right? Are we going to make way for slower pedestrians and bicyclists as we should? Or are we going to sort of have an assumption that the space was made for us individually and not share it? So I think that can stretch across all different forms of transportation.
I'm just going to chime in and say that these are the same conversations that we have, right, regarding folks who use bicycle as something to ride fast, to race, right, be able to work out. So I think these are important conversations regarding how that perception is. I've certainly have ridden with folks like Kristen on e-bikes who have been very considerate. And most of my experience has been with folks who are training, using those really expensive fast bikes, kind of zooming by. But right, it's perception. It's also showing the community what it can look like. At the same time, while helping, right, folks who are riding slow still have that access to that same space, and feel welcomed.
I like how you're bringing it back to all of you about the space, and that's what we're talking about here, and not only bikes, but I also got to thinking about how with the pedal assist bikes and e-bikes that can really be something that is more accessible for older adults or people with disabilities, those with, who just at all ages and abilities that might not feel like they have the balance or means to be on a regular bike. And also something I've heard from people in the community here, back to culture and this topic, is like, they said, hey, I just want to arrive to my destination looking good. I don't want to be, especially in Tucson, and it's getting hot and approaching summer, like arrive super sweaty and in total disarray. So it's like a lot of other facilities that are available too. But yeah, I was thinking about how e-bikes, if we can make them more affordable and accessible through these incentive programs and other strategies that Ash is talking about, how that could be like a real gateway for those people that have not experienced what it is like to move around by bike. If anybody has something to share along those lines, love to hear.
Yeah, I just want to share, you mentioned about being accessible to folks. My husband bought an e-bike with the hope of riding to work every day. And what happened is that we got COVID, and he has long-term COVID, in which it's affecting his mobility in general, and being able to ride on a bike long distance. If it wasn't for his e-bike, he wouldn't be able to ride a bike, just because he is mobility challenged right now, having to ride long distances. So that e-bike is accessible to him, and he's able to ride because it has the pedal assist. And he actually, I think it's the third bicycle or model, because he has the throttle on it as well. So the fact that you mentioned that, and it hits close to home, right? Because my husband can't ride when our Fuga rides because of his long-term COVID, but can access his bike, to do some type of mobility, and that's been helping him with recovering.
Vanessa, I love that story. Yeah, I think I know e-bikes have traditionally, not that they've been around for that long, but there's been a lot of conversations about like, oh, well, people that are older can ride these and keep up with others. Yes. And they're great for everybody. I mean, I have two, and I hate to say it, but I don't ride my traditional bike that often anymore, because I live on a very big hill, and it's very not fun to get to the end of my ride and have to ride up this thing. And I have a cargo bike that I put my kids on, and we ride to the park, and they blow bubbles, and it's beautiful. I've had multiple friends be injured and use their e-bikes as a form of recovery. This is actually something the industry is interested in kind of leaning into more, is how do we talk about the health benefits of e-bikes, not necessarily just physically, but also mentally, emotionally, as we're all coming out of the last few years of just terribleness. Can we use bikes and e-bikes as a form of, recovery for both our emotional and mental and physical health? And yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do in the health space to just get people more mobile. This idea of, e-bikes are cheating, let's move away from that narrative, because you're not cheating as long as you're moving, in my perception. And I think one of the big things that the bike industry and a lot of outdoor industries need to overcome is this kind of exclusivity of like, well, you got to earn it, you got to push, you got to, no, we're getting people out of cars. We're getting people to the places they want to be without being horribly sweaty. Like, let's reframe the role of the bicycle and that you don't have to suffer to be out there.
I love this energy. I'm feeling the hope here. So thank you all. Like, we need reframing the conversation, this changing the narrative around it. And I love all the examples you're sharing. We have my colleague here saying, Ben, who's in the backstage, I love my e-cargo trike that could get me from Midtown to the South Side for a Fuga ride and my toddler in tow. So we're seeing more of these e-cargo trikes as well, which is really exciting. I also have some other comments from local folks saying, from Mike Barton, Vanessa and Kristen, thank you for your authentic advocacy in our community. The way you truly live your values is inspirational, and I couldn't agree more. And Ryan Stephenson, Bicus Fuga LSA are critical assets in connecting our community. Much love. So this has been a great conversation. We still have like 8 minutes left, so hang in there, everyone. In terms of, we're talking about, let's see, safety and environmental responsibility. How does this apply to your work? I just heard some of you talk about how, or Ash Lavelle, how we're getting people out of cars, and that's part of the narrative, but I've heard other themes come up in this conversation about the environmental part and how we can really be, a lot of your work is really intersectional. Like you said, it's like the bike is the tool, but you're doing all of this other work and in that climate space too. So how would you say that this applies to your work?
Start with communities that have been historically marginalized, not just in transportation, right? I'll just mention the South Side. The South Side is overrepresented with industrial zoning. I know that was mentioned earlier by our mayor. These are communities that we're trying to engage outside. So when we're talking about transitioning from vehicles to EV, whether it's a bike or a car, we're talking about these communities that are constantly being bombarded with emissions, from all types of industries. So while we're talking about getting folks on bikes and moving, to EV vehicles or bikes, these are communities that have been overrepresented with emissions. So this conversation excites me, right? Because it not only impacts folks moving to places, but also the community itself, the air itself. I know that one of the things for our community to really buy in with e-bikes is also seeing how sustainable they are. I know we touched a little bit about recycling and how accessible will that be. I think the other part of it is how accessible that battery is, right? We know that these batteries are typically not very cheap, So I think all this with environmental, with e-bikes, or even just EV in general, the community needs to be able to see themselves accessing those tools. So it's great conversation because this is coming and the community equally needs to be educated on these things and how it can benefit their community, and why, you know, investing in this bicycle that might seem out of their range can really do more for the entire community. But yeah, I think this is super important, and it intersects climate, you know, when we need it now, right? Making these huge changes.
Wow, Vanessa, I love how you brought it back to environmental justice and health, which was also what you were talking about with the last question. You shared the story about your husband and the long-term COVID, but this is so unfortunate and so much about health and the environment and those exposures that didn't happen by accident, right? By these policies and poor decisions made in the past that we're now trying to reverse. But I am feeling hopeful that through your work and also through like the policies and the infrastructure, all of those things, that we're moving in a better direction. Is there anything else that you ladies want to share on this topic? Something that's coming up, bubbling up inside you?
I wanted to just kind of touch on, like, I think it's really exciting, some of the changes that we've seen with electric bikes, and then also just with the bicycle salvage that we're doing all the time. But I think it's important to constantly, that we as the public be pushing back against, sort of as these things are produced, of like, okay, how easy will they be to work on? How easy will they be for regular people to maintain? Can we get more conversion kits so that people who are interested in an e-bike that's affordable use a salvage bike and upgrade it? And I know there are some different opportunities in that, but that, like, really what I'm seeing with the work that we do at Bicus is people, we don't just recycle because we want to save the environment, but because we need to hang on to these limited resources that we have in our community and distribute them and share them and use them again, and then use them again, and then use them like a third time. And so how can we connect those needs more deeply into these policies as they roll out?
That's really enlightening, Kristen. I want to come back to that when I'm continue the conversation here on a local level. And you have these insights of really like the conversion kits. Like, I didn't even think about that. But really the need for recycling and why you're doing it, and how that is also a transition to e-bikes. We have 2 minutes left. So one last question for the audience. How can we advocate at the local and regional level to forward legislation and policies at all levels to promote bike commuting and e-bike incentives? Big question.
Kristen, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's tricky to get involved sometimes. You know, you have to kind of find those local people that are watching these things, like Bicus and Fuga and LSA and the city of Tucson, and just try to tap into what's going on. But I think just even joining recreational riding groups and expressing that kind of does help you get really more invested in what's going on, and sort of shows you where to put your voice. But I think a lot of what we need to do at our local and regional level is make sure that the decision makers are representing our communities, that the people at the table aren't just advocating for our marginalized communities on the South Side, but are from our marginalized communities, right? And that I think is how we really move forward in making sure that the new policies are centering the folks most affected by them.
Wow, what a great way to end this session. Thanks, Kristen. You gave us a tangible way of how this matters in terms of elections and our elected officials, and really being representative of the people that we work for and advocate for every day. So thank you, Ash, Vanessa, and Kristen. This has been wonderful and a privilege to hold this space. And yeah, we're looking forward to continuing this work. Thank you. And thank you to the audience. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.